Imagine being the most brilliant military mind in Europe, a man who had conquered kingdom after kingdom, humiliated empires, and made entire nations bow before him. Now imagine losing, not to a grand army, not to a military genius, but to snow. Yep, that's the story of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1812, when he invaded Russia and walked straight into history's coldest, deadliest slap in the face. By 1812, Napoleon was on top of the world. The guy had steamrolled through Europe like an unstoppable force. France was a superpower, and he had turned half of Europe into his puppet states. The only major problem? Russia. Napoleon and the Russian Tsar, Alexander I, had an agreement. Russia wouldn't trade with Britain, Napoleon's biggest enemy. But guess what? Russia broke that agreement. And Napoleon? Well, if there's one thing he hated, it was being disrespected. So he decided, fine, I'll just invade Russia and teach them a lesson. Spoiler alert, that did not go as planned. Napoleon gathered his legendary Grand Army, over 600,000 men. It was the largest European army ever assembled at that time. Soldiers came from France, Italy, Germany, Poland, you name it. With this massive force, Napoleon was confident. He had never lost a war on this scale, but he forgot one tiny detail. Russia is massive, and it doesn't fight fair. Napoleon expected the Russians to fight like gentlemen, line up, face off, and see who's the best. But the Russians were like, nope, not today. Instead of facing Napoleon in a big, decisive battle, they kept retreating, but not before burning everything behind them. Farms? Burned. Villages? Burned. Food supplies? Burned. Napoleon's army, already marching hundreds of miles, was now starving, exhausted, and frustrated. They were chasing ghosts. Finally, after months of marching, Napoleon caught up with the Russian army near a small town called Borodino. Now, Borodino was a bloodbath. Over 70,000 men died in a single day. Napoleon won, technically, but at a massive cost. His army was bleeding out, and still no surrender from Russia. But Napoleon had one last card to play. He pushed forward, marching into Moscow, the Russian capital. Surely this would end the war, right? Nope, because Moscow was empty. When Napoleon's troops entered Moscow, they expected food, supplies, a warm welcome, something. Instead, the city was deserted, no people, no government, no surrender, and then it started burning. The Russians had set their own capital on fire. For days, flames swallowed the city. Napoleon and his men stood there in disbelief. That's when it hit him. Russia wasn't playing by his rules. No food, no shelter, no surrender, and winter was coming, fast. Napoleon knew he was in deep trouble. He had two options: stay in a burning city and starve to death. Retreat before winter destroys his army. He chose to retreat. And that was when everything fell apart. The moment the French army turned back, the Russian winter unleashed its full fury. Temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Soldiers' eyelashes and beards froze solid. Food ran out. Men started boiling leather from their shoes just to survive. Wounded soldiers, left behind, the weak, collapsed in the snow. The Cossacks, Russia's deadly cavalry warriors, hunted down stragglers like wolves. This wasn't a retreat, it was a massacre. By the time Napoleon reached the Berezina River, his army was a walking corpse. The French had to cross the icy river while the Russian army was closing in from behind. Thousands drowned in the freezing water. Thousands more were cut down by Russian artillery. It was total chaos. By the time Napoleon made it out of Russia, his grand army of 600,000 had shrunk to barely 20,000. Now that's a 97% casualty rate. Napoleon, once the undefeated conqueror of Europe, was now a broken man. Napoleon never recovered. His defeat in Russia gave his enemies the courage to strike back. By 1814, France was invaded. By 1815, Napoleon was exiled to an island, where he spent the rest of his days probably still shivering. This one invasion destroyed his empire, his army, and his legacy. History teaches us many lessons, but this one is crystal clear. Never invade Russia in winter? Don't believe me? Just ask. Napoleon, 1812. Hitler, 1941. Anyone who thinks a hoodie is enough for Moscow in December. What do you think? Was Napoleon doomed from the start, or could he have actually won if he played it differently? Drop a comment, and hey, hit subscribe. Before winter gets you next.